Bala, thank you so much for joining FF News' coverage of Money 2020 Vegas. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. Thank you for having me here.
It's an absolute pleasure. Bala, can you tell our viewers your role at Jumio and a bit about Jumio, please?
Absolutely. My name is Bala Kumar. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Jumio. I've been here with the company for almost 2 years at this point in time. I was brought in to help with laying out the vision and strategy for the organization.
Incredible. Now, with that strategy, let's look at the importance of KYC and the strategy going forward. I think KYC is obviously knowing your customer and everything around that has been such a critical part of the chat in the industry recently. What areas of verification are the most difficult to obtain for financial institutions to help their business customers?
It's very important to frame this conversation, especially with the COVID pandemic. A lot of businesses have gone into a faceless channel, and folks have been working through digital media for quite a while now. In this faceless channel, it's very important to be able to understand who you're doing business with, which is why KYC is very critical for organizations. And one, it's for businesses to know who they're working with. Two, from a regulatory compliance standpoint, there are a lot of regulations across different regions that require customers to perform the right due diligence in figuring out who they're working with. So KYC is very critical. To get the right KYC solution in place, you need to be looking at a very holistic view of individuals. It's not about just one or two attributes. If you think about an individual, you got a name, you have an address, there's an email, phone, device, a government issued ID, a driver's license, a passport, etc. So there's so many attributes about individuals. Oftentimes companies are looking at just a handful of these attributes. By leveraging a solution that looks much more holistically, you have a full 360-degree view of that individual that gives you increased confidence that you're doing business with the right people.
Definitely. Now, over the last 2 years as well, we've seen businesses regrow their global expansion. We've seen FIs enable business customers to transact across the world, but also with the pandemic, we've seen a massive increase in fraud, and especially when companies are dealing cross-border payments and everything like that. So what are some of the common types of fraud that are affecting the industry? And is there a pattern, and what tools can you help FIs use to crack down on cybersecurity?
Fraudsters are a sophisticated lot. We shouldn't kid ourselves about it. Every time there's an opportunity, they're going to be knocking on the door. The pandemic has given them that opening. Especially, as I said earlier, companies going to a faceless digital channel, it's opened up the doors for fraudsters to try and get their foot in the door. So fraudsters are constantly trying to evolve their attack vectors. We have seen simple amateur fraud attacks where they're just reusing email IDs, reusing devices. These are very easy to catch, but we are also seeing a lot of sophisticated fraud. We see a lot of IDs that are digitally manipulated. Yep. So you'll see the same ID with different faces, different document numbers coming through. At the face of it, these look like real IDs, but in reality, these are not. And that's where solutions like what Jumio brings to market helps quite a lot, because we can detect that digital manipulation of that ID. So it's not just about, again, like I said, that holistic view, looking at a combination of what email ID is associated with this transaction, what device is used for this transaction, what ID was submitted for this transaction, allows us to stitch all these different attributes together. When we see the same device showing up with a different ID multiple times, we know there's something fishy going on there, right? So it's always about looking holistically across multiple attributes and then figuring out what the risk posture needs to be.
Incredible. Now, I think if you look at the way that fraud has reacted to the pandemic in a holistic way, you can kind of burrow down and see that maybe it was the human element, the consumer at the end of the chain, that has become the weakest link in said chain. So how have you seen changes to the way the consumer deals with fraud, for instance, with multi-factor authentication? The onus is suddenly back on the consumer. What are you seeing in terms of friction there?
Absolutely. When you try to keep fraudsters out of the equation, you end up putting friction in the path of good consumers. When you think about it, 95-96% of transactions are good people. It's only 2 to 4% of the transactions that are bad actors. But in trying to keep those 2 to 4% out, you're actually putting friction in the path of the 96-97% of the population, right? And so it's very important for any solution out there to find that right balance between friction for the bad actors and allowing the good actors, good people come through the door. I always use the analogy of TSA pre. What experience do you want to have when you go through airport security? Do you want to go through the line where you have to take your shoes off, your laptop out of the bag, your toiletries out of the bag, or do you want to go through TSA pre-check where you're just walking through and you're through the security line in 30 seconds or less, right? Our goal is to provide that frictionless experience for consumers, and the way you do it is by looking at that holistic view of that individual. From an end consumer standpoint, every time they run into friction, they're generally going to abandon the process, and they're going to go knock on some of the door where the process is much more easier. Again, back to airport security. People will pay that extra dollar to go through TSA PreCheck because they want that convenience, right? So there's a direct impact on consumers when you start putting fraud deterrence in the path of any transaction. Multi-factor authentication is one of the tools folks use. It worked really well in the early days when you're using multi-factor authentication through email IDs or phone numbers, but fraudsters have figured that out through SIM swapping and other mechanisms. They've been able to hack through that as well. Not as rampant yet, but there are folks who have figured that out, and it's not going to be too long before they start spreading that knowledge. Just like we spread knowledge among good people, fraudsters also share information amongst their own kin, and so it's important to start bringing in additional layers of authentication without introducing friction for the good people.
Fascinating, because you make a great point. The fraudsters are ever evolving. If we just increase the friction to make ourselves more secure, we're eventually going to get to a process where no one wants to pay for anything. So we focused the last question on consumers. I think we should stay there. And consumers have often been giving away their private data to a lot of companies, allowing fraudsters to rule the roost. How can we win the trust of the consumers back again and really work out how to save customers' data and improve security at the same time?
I think consumers, on one hand, because of social networks, they're out there sharing a lot of their personal information. My own family, my sister, she posts a lot of information on Facebook, for example, right? And I constantly have to keep cautioning her about how much of her personal data she's putting out there. So there's one angle through which information is getting out there. Let's not forget the data breaches that are also occurring, right? There's a lot of companies that have been impacted by data breaches and a ton of information that's out there. So it's very easy, I guarantee your information, my information, a bunch of our information is out there in the dark web. So if a fraudster wants to submit a transaction in our names, they easily can. They can get the name, address, email, phone. But some of the things that they cannot get are things like our driver's license, or our passports, etc., right? So especially in this data breach environment, it is important to have additional verification, authentication controls to be able to make sure that the person who's submitting the transaction is actually the person who's possessing the driver's license as well. So you look for possession and not just the quality of the information that is provided. Right, so that's where companies like Jumio, when we bring that ID verification capability to the equation, we are able to look at what's the risk of the name, address, what's the risk of the email, what's the risk of the phone. And by the way, is all that information tied to this individual who's owning the driver's license. Add to that a selfie that we take that allows us to match the biometric information to the picture that's on the ID as well. It's very rare that a fraudster is going to be forcing for a selfie, right? And so people are actually getting more comfortable with biometric information, right? With face unlock on your phone, etc. 5 years ago, 8 years ago, folks were a little uncomfortable with it. No longer the case now, right? The best iPhones and the Android devices out there support face unlock. So folks are used to looking at their cameras and unlocking devices. So when they are asked to pose for a selfie, when they're going through an account opening scenario, or if they're trying to transfer big amounts of funds from their bank accounts, they're totally open with sharing their biometric information as well. So we've gotten to a place in the world where people are comfortable sharing some of this information as long as it is handled responsibly and as long as the data is secure.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bala. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Cheers. Thank you.